Look at Part 1.
Part 1.
You are going to listen to the director of a college talking about his school. Listen to the talk and answer the questions.
First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 3. Now we shall begin. You should answer the questions as you listen, because you will not hear the recording a second time. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 3.
Many of you already have a reasonably firm idea of the general subject area you wish to study. Others are more open and searching for ideas. Whatever your situation, I hope you find that we have a course that meets your needs. Our firm aim is to be a student-centred institution with a special emphasis on flexibility. This begins with our attitude to access. We judge people on their motivation and commitment to study as much as, if not more than, formal qualifications. This is reflected in the vitality and diversity of our student population. Some of our students come direct from sixth form or college.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 4 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 4 to 10.
Others are coming into higher education after a short or long gap from formal education. Some are seeking a specific set of skills with a particular job or profession in mind. Others are retraining or studying to give their careers a new direction or dimension. Some are learning about the very latest scientific, technological and commercial knowledge. Others are stretching their minds on sensitive environmental, social and cultural issues. Even a casual observation of the mix of our student body indicates that we're close to our aim of being a polytechnic for the whole community. To meet our students' needs, we have 500 academic and a further 500 support staff committed to good quality teaching, high standards, and sensitive and sympathetic student care. We have probably the longest experience of understanding and dealing with the differing needs of a diverse student population. I hope you'll find a suitable course at the Polytechnic College. If you want to come to the college and we consider you suitable, we'll do our best to find you a place. And when you're here, we'll work hard to make your experience enjoyable, stimulating, and educationally rewarding.
That is the end of Part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to Part 2.
Part 2.
You will hear the director of a new arts centre speaking to a group of local people who have come to hear what the new arts centre will be offering. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 15. Listen carefully to the first part of the talk and answer questions 11 to 15.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you all for turning out on this cold, wet evening. Welcome to our new art centre. I'm delighted that so many people are interested in finding out about the facilities and events that we'll be offering. I'll start with the regular evening events that we've scheduled so far. Sunday night will be film club night. Each week, we'll be showing a classic film from the 40s, 50s or 60s. Films will start at 6:45, and afterwards there will be an opportunity to discuss the film in the cafe bar for anybody who'd like to. Tickets for the film will be £5, but the discussion afterwards is free, although anybody who wants to buy me a drink is welcome to do so. On Thursday evenings at 7:30, the auditorium is given over to productions by touring theatre companies. This coming Thursday, we're very excited to be welcoming Pizzazz, a drama company featuring both able-bodied and physically handicapped actors. They'll be performing a rather special version of William Shakespeare's The Tempest, featuring music and dance, as well as dialogue. Fridays and Saturdays will be music nights, starting at 8 p.m, with classical or traditional music on the Fridays and pop rock on the Saturdays. However, as the sound system hasn't yet been fully installed, these events won't be starting for another few weeks. As well as evening performances, various events will take place during the day. So far, a mothers and toddlers session has been arranged for Monday afternoons, and of course, anybody can drop in for a coffee or a sandwich. The cafe bar will be open from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. Mondays to Fridays, and 11 a.m. to midnight Saturdays and Sundays. Lunch will be served from 12:30 till 2, and light snacks will be available all day. Of course, this programme is just the start, and we expect to be announcing many additional events in the near future.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 16 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 16 to 20.
Now I'd like to take this opportunity to tell you about becoming a member. Membership benefits include reduced price tickets, priority bookings, and a monthly newsletter, which will feature the latest details of forthcoming events, plus details of other arts events in the local area. The cost of membership is just £15 a year, which I think is very reasonable. To get a membership card, you'll need to provide us with a passport-sized photo, plus payment, of course, by cash or cheque. We can't accept credit cards, I'm afraid, at least not for the moment. We hope to have credit card payment facilities available in the not-too-distant future. Then, when you want to buy reduced price tickets, you simply show your card at the box office or quote your membership number if you're making a telephone booking. Generally, a membership card will save around 20% on the full ticket price, so it really is very good value. Now we come to the most important part, your suggestions. It's your art centre, so we want to hear what you'd like to see.
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3.
Part 3.
You will hear two students, Jenna and Marco, discussing a business studies project they have to do. You now have 15 seconds to read questions 21 to 24.
Come on, Marco. We've got to get on and sort out this project for Professor Buckley.
Hang on. I want to make sure we've got all the information. Now, where are we?
Well, today we need to sort out exactly what we're going to do and how we're going to divide the work up.
Okay. How long have we got, by the way?
The end of term is April 6th. And he said to hand it in on week 8, so that's March 25th at the latest, because the beginning of that week is the 21st, so not long.
Right. Have you got the notes there?
Yes. He wants us to do a fairly small-scale study, like the last one, on whether or not businesses were offering more benefits to staff. And we've now got to look at the rise in older workers. It should be fairly straightforward.
Yeah, as long as we keep it small. Who's marking it?
I don't know. Sometimes he gets the PhD students to mark it for him.
Oh, actually, it just says here, a senior lecturer. I suppose it's too much for Professor Barclay to do them all.
Yeah. Anyway, how are we going to go about this?
Well, we have to decide how big we want it to be and who...
Yeah, but I think we must sort out a timetable for the project. Otherwise, nothing will get done.
Okay. Do you want to do that?
All right. I'll do it as soon as we finish here.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 25 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 25 to 30.
Okay. What do we have to do now for the project? What's the best way to go about it?
Well, Professor Carter suggested we set up a focus group to get some in-depth interviews, but I think that'll take a lot of time.
Yeah, I agree. If we did a focus group, we'd have to spend time deciding who to include in it, and it's not necessary to do one anyway.
Oh, fine.
And if you agree, I think we should get in touch with the businesses on the list Professor Carter gave us and ask them if they're prepared to participate.
Sounds good. Then we can go there, give them questionnaires and collect them later.
Exactly.
Okay. Then do we need to book one of those study rooms in the library so we can work together to input the data? Perhaps not, as I guess just one of us could just sort it out actually.
Yes, that would be easier. A lot of what we're doing is qualitative, so it'll be writing up rather than statistics. No software for that, I'm afraid.
And I think it would look better if we had actual shots of some of the staff, because we're citing appearance as a factor in employability, aren't we?
Yeah, okay. I'll factor that all in when I sort everything out tonight.
I'm glad we decided to work together. I think it's going to work out well.
Yes, well, given that we had to work in pairs on this project, I think we were right to choose each other. We complement each other academically, as we're each good at what the other isn't. In fact, we should have tried working together before.
Yes. Now, how shall we split the work? I'll do the analysis, shall I?
Oh, okay.
It's just that it might be faster, because I'm used to doing it. Although your English is better than mine. I need more practice at reading, really.
Okay, I'll do the presentation then, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, sure. I don't mind speaking in public, but I hate preparing all the notes for them.
The thing is, the tutor said one person should do the whole presentation, and he said he expects me to do it because I haven't done one yet.
No, that's fine. Now, let's see.
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 4.
Part 4.
You will hear part of a lecture about a crater in Australia. First, you have some time to read questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Lake Acraman in South Australia is Armageddon for the purist. No other meteorite impact on Earth has stamped the surrounding rocks with such an abiding, unequivocal geological record of collision, earthquake, wind, fire and tsunami, the giant waves formed by major Earth movements. The story it tells is elemental, without dying dinosaurs or even Bruce Willis to complicate its simple message of destruction. First, the numbers. About 590 million years ago, a rocky meteorite more than 4 kilometres across and travelling at around 90,000 kilometres an hour slammed into an area of red volcanic rock about 430 kilometres northwest of Adelaide. Within seconds, the meteorite vaporised in a ball of fire, carving out a crater about 4 kilometres deep and 40 kilometres in diameter, and spawning earthquakes fierce enough to raise 100-metre-high tsunamis in a shallow sea 300 kilometres away. Ancient, stable and unglaciated, the bedrock of Australia preserves some of the most photogenic impact craters in the world. Acraman is not one of them. 500 million years of erosion has taken its toll. A salt pan surrounded by low hills is all that remains to mark the site of the cataclysm. The true nature of the place dawned on geologist George Williams of Adelaide University in 1979. Gazing at a sheaf of newly acquired satellite images, he saw the small circular shape of Lake Acraman surrounded by a ring of faults and low scarps 40 kilometres across, and an outer ring twice this size. A year later, he made it to the site. On islands near the centre of the lake, Williams found bedrock shattered in a conical pattern that experts consider a sure sign of a meteorite impact. Except for a crater, which had long since eroded, the area was a textbook example of an impact site. In 1985, further intriguing evidence turned up. Vic Gostin, another Adelaide geologist, had been studying a thin band of fragmented red volcanic rock in 600-million-year-old shale in the Flinders Ranges, more than 300 kilometres east of Acraman. To his bewilderment, the volcanic chunks turned out to be 1 billion years older than the shale. Where had they come from? Comparing samples, Gostin and Williams found that their rocks were identical. The red rock in the Flinders Ranges had been blasted there from Acraman. Later, the same material turned up at sites 500 kilometres from Acraman. Everywhere, the bands of fragments showed the same structure. Coarse pebbles at the bottom, then a cocktail of silt and sand, then layers of increasingly fine sand distorted on top into a wavy, scalloped pattern. These layers also show, step by step, how the meteorite transformed the floor of an ancient sea hundreds of kilometres away, according to Malcolm Wallace of Melbourne University. First came the earthquake. Travelling at about 3 kilometres a second, shock waves arrived offshore within a minute or two of the collision, stirring up the water with clouds of silt as the seabed shook. Then shattered rock from the explosion arrived by air. Pebbles and boulders crashed into the water, reaching a depth of about 200 metres within a minute. One day they would become the lower band of the Flinders Rock. Sand took up to an hour to come to rest, finally bedding down with the silt that was also now settling on the sea floor as the effects of the earthquake died away. This mixture would eventually form the next layer. About an hour after the meteorite's impact, huge waves rolled in, leaving the ripples on the surface that later hardened into rock. Clear as mud is not an oxymoron. In Acraman, the arid, timeless Australian outback has preserved the closest thing the earth can boast to a perfect pockmark, the pinnacle of imperfection.
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
You've just found the ultimate guide to IELTS listening. This is the longest, most detailed, most comprehensive guide to IELTS listening on the internet. It will help you succeed by helping you understand the test format, tips and strategies that only Band 9 students really understand. We're also going to show you where to find real IELTS listening practice tests for free and how to use those practice tests to constantly improve your score to a Band 9. And at the end, we're also going to give you one of our VIP IELTS listening practice tests for free. So all you have to do is sit back, watch this video, and get the score that you need for IELTS listening. Let's start off by talking about the IELTS listening test format, because Band 9 students understand things about the format of the test and then adapt their preparation to match that format. The IELTS listening test is the same for general training and academic. And Band 9 students understand this, and what they do is they use a range of different sources to practice with, both academic and general social situations to listen to. They expose themselves to all of these different inputs, which means that on test day, they are totally comfortable with what they hear. On test day, you're going to have to answer 40 questions. And the goal is to answer 40 out of 40 correctly. So you need to understand the test format. So part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, as you go along these 4 parts, they progressively get more and more difficult. Band 9 students understand this, and what they do to combat this is they will spend a lot more time during the preparation on parts 3 and 4, because parts 3 and 4 really separate out the band 7s from the band 8s from the band 9s. Now, normally band 8, band 9 students are getting 100% of their answers correct in part 1 and part 2, and then they really focus their preparation on part 3 and part 4 in order to feel 100% comfortable and know that they're going to do well on test day. And band 9 students also understand the different styles of listening script that they're going to hear on test day. Part 1, part 2, part 3, and part 4 are all different. So let's look at each of those parts. Part 1 is going to be in a general or social setting with more than one speaker, normally 2 speakers. And often this will be someone phoning someone else and then form filling or taking down information, such as taking down a telephone number or a license plate number or an address. Now, this is quite an unusual way to listen to English. In normal situations, we are not normally listening to someone writing down a telephone number. So the best way to prepare for this and practice this is actually use the official listening test that you get from Cambridge. And I'll show you where to find those for free later on in this video. But if you want to really nail part 1, practice those, get used to those practice tests in part 1, and you should be absolutely fine. Part 2 gets a little bit more difficult on the listening test. This is where you are again listening to a social or a general situation, but only one person is talking at this time. So this could be someone talking about their holiday or reviewing a book or something like that. So what successful students do is they listen to this type of social situation with one person talking when they're practicing their listening. Examples of this could be a podcast where someone is just talking by themselves on the podcast. They are excellent for practicing your listening skills. Or there are many YouTube channels like this one where there's one person talking to camera, and again, this is great practice. What I would recommend doing is pick something that you love. Pick a YouTube channel that you love, not a IELTS channel, because IELTS is pretty boring, or a podcast that you love. Think of something you enjoy listening to. And when you are on the bus or on your way to work or on your lunch break, you can just listen to this and you are improving your ability to do part 2 of the listening test. Part 3 gets a little bit more difficult again. The context switches to an academic context. But don't worry, you don't have to be an academic person. You don't have to be at university studying a very academic subject to do well in this part. Remember, academic and general training exactly the same for the listening test. The key here for part 3 of the listening test is you're going to have to listen to multiple people speaking at the same time. So where can you find that? Successful students usually listen to podcasts. So there are lots and lots of podcasts out there where they will invite guests on, so 2, 3, 4 guests, and they will all debate a topic. Again, what I would recommend doing is find a podcast either on your podcast app or on YouTube where you have multiple people discussing an academic topic. This could be history or science or health, anything that you are mildly interested in. And really what you're trying to do is differentiate between the different accents, the way that people interject, the way that people show their opinion, the way that people agree with one another or disagree with one another. That's what you should be thinking about when you're practicing for part 3 of the listening test. Part 4 is the most difficult part. It is an academic context and there is just one person talking. Normally, this will be an academic lecture, like someone giving a lecture at a university. A great way to practice this is through TED Talks. Go on to TED.com or go to their YouTube channel and find some TED Talks that you enjoy listening to, that you think might benefit you or you're just interested in them, and try and listen to how the person gets their points across, how they stage what they're saying. They are probably going to use words like first or firstly, we're going to talk about this, and then we're going to talk about that. Think about how they use this type of language to make what they are talking about clearer to you, the listener. So now that we know what each part comprises of, and we know what's going to come up in each part of the listening test, we need to now think about the types of questions that will come up on the listening test. Because if you know the context, how many people are talking in each part, and you're comfortable using the different types of questions, then you will be in a very, very good position to get a band 8 or a band 9 on test day, because you know exactly what is coming up, you're not stressed, and you're going to feel very comfortable and just listen, get the answer, write it down, and get the score that you need. Now, the most important thing when it comes to the different types of questions is to understand that there are many different types. There are more than 10 different types of listening question that you might get. For example, you might get a multiple choice question, you might get summary completion, or you might get labeling a map or filling in information. The key thing to remember here is that they are asking you a variety of different questions to test a variety of different listening skills. Therefore, the biggest thing that you should not do is just go into the test and have one strategy for all the different types of questions, because they're all very, very different. So what we're going to do in this video later on, we're going to give you strategies for all of the different types of questions. Right now, all you need to know is that there are different types of questions that require different strategies. Later on in the video, we're going to give you those, but keep watching because there's some really important information coming. You will have to listen to the IELTS listening test for 30 minutes. This is really crucial to understand because many people for the first time in their lives are listening to 30 minutes of English continuously on test day. You do not want the first time that you ever continuously focus on listening to English for 30 minutes, you don't want that to be test day. Many students that we work with have great listening skills, but they lack the stamina, the focus to listen continuously for 30 minutes. So what can you do about that? You need to get used to listening and focusing on what you're listening to for long periods of time. But what you should not do is just on day one, get some practice tests, try and listen for 30 minutes. And then what will happen is after 5 or 10 minutes, you'll lose focus and then you'll beat yourself up. You'll be like, oh, I'm terrible, I'm going to fail. Don't do that, all right? Imagine you are running a marathon race, all right? How long is a marathon race? I don't know exactly. Let's say it is 25 miles. On day one, you don't go and try and run 25 miles. You might run 5 miles, then 8 miles, then 12, then 16, then 20, and then eventually you get to 25. You should do the exact same thing when you're preparing for the test. What I would do is get a little clock like this, put 5 minutes on and do some practice tests or listen to a podcast or a TED Talk and be completely focused on that. Actually listen to what the person is saying. And then the next day, try and go to 7 minutes or 10 minutes. and then the next day 12 minutes or 15 minutes. Listening is just like a muscle. You need to build that up over time, all right? And if you do that over the course of a few weeks, you will be able to 100% focus for 30 minutes. And that's what we need if we want a band 9. If we miss one question or two questions or three questions, then it's unlikely we're going to get that score. You need to be able to focus completely for 30 minutes. Another common reason why students don't do so well and don't get a band 8 or a band 9 is because they're not used to listening to recordings in English once. On test day, you will only hear the listening once. Is this because Cambridge are horrible people and they want you to fail? No. What are they doing? They are recreating real life. In real life, if you go to university, the university lecturer is not going to repeat themselves multiple times. If you get a job and someone asks you to do something, they're not going to repeat it multiple times. If you are at an airport and you hear, information about your flight, they won't do it 5 times because you don't know what they are actually saying. Many English teachers spoil their students. Most English teachers want their students to like them. So what they do is they'll play recordings 2, 3, 4 times. This is like a mother or father spoiling their child. They want them to do well, but they need to get a little harsher in order to get the child to actually perform and not be spoiled. That's exactly what you need to get used to. When you're practicing, when you're listening to podcasts, when you're listening to YouTube, when you're practicing your listening, try to get used to listening to things once and thinking about the answer and what they said once. Then after that, you can check your answer, you can listen back, but don't make it the very first time on test day that you are listening to things once, because you will get a very low score. Right, these are very, very important. Headphones. On test day, you will either be given a pair of headphones like this, or you will be played the recording from a loudspeaker in a room. What I would recommend doing is try to book the computer-based test, because on the computer-based test, you're going to be in a smaller room with fewer people and you are going to have headphones. You're guaranteed to have headphones on the computer-based test. I've done both the paper-based test and the computer-based test, and headphones dramatically improve your focus. It's not so much it makes the test easier, it just makes it easier to hear, and it is a listening test, so that does improve your score. If you live in a part of the world that doesn't have computer-delivered IELTS tests and you must do a paper-based test, try to choose the test center that is going to have the best audio quality available. So what you can do is, when you're booking your test with IDP or the British Council, whoever it is, ask them about the quality of the audio. Tell them that you're worried about that. And if on test day, and this does happen, they either, give you a terrible set of headphones, or the recording is just terrible quality, or you're in a big room full of people and you can't hear it, complain on test day. If you do not complain on test day, it doesn't matter. You would not believe the number of students that email us, IELTS Advantage, and say, we had a problem with the audio, what can I do? I don't know, I'm not the British Council, I'm not IDP. You are paying money to IDP, you're paying money to the British Council. If they don't provide you with a good enough service, complain to them on test day. A big difference between the reading test and the listening test is with the reading test, you can manage your own time. You can go at your own pace. But with the listening test, because you are listening to a recording, you must go at the pace of the actual listening script. This means that there are no such thing as time management tips or time management strategies that are going to help you. I've worked with hundreds of Band 9 students who got a Band 9 on the listening test, and none of them deployed any sort of time management techniques or strategies on test day when it came to the listening test. What they did was they became better at listening. They improved their listening skills. They became more aware of the different types of listening question, and they perfected their strategy for each different type of question. If you do that, then you will not get lost. You don't really need any time management tips. And that's what we're going to help you with in the rest of this video. Finally, I have some good news about the IELTS listening test. When you're listening to the people talking in the IELTS listening test, that is a very unusual way of talking. Kind of like I am talking to you right now. I am focusing on being as clear and as slow as possible. And that's what most of the IELTS listening test is like. It is not like listening to real native English speakers speaking to one another. But what I would recommend doing is not just practice the IELTS listening test. That is important, but it is kind of a easy form of IELTS listening. What I would do is expose yourself to how real native English speakers actually speak to one another. Again, using real forms of English, like podcasts, for example. And then that is going to give you a huge advantage because there's a saying, train hard, fight easy. It comes from the army, all right? When you are training hard, when you're listening to more difficult English, the IELTS listening test will be really, really easy. So most of the Band 9 students that I work with, they are listening to native English speakers talk all the time, and that makes the listening test very, very easy for them. Okay, so now we know the format of the test. Let's think about the different tips and tricks that you can use on test day to improve your IELTS listening score. Tip number 1 for the IELTS listening test is read the instructions carefully, especially when it comes to word count. When you look at the questions, it might say something like write only one word or write no more than 2 words and or a number. Often students get very confused about this, so let's show you exactly what this means. First of all, every word counts. So even prepositions, even articles, they all count. So for example, airport, that's 1 word. The airport, that is 2 words. At the airport, that is 3 words. The only exception to this are hyphenated words such as ex-examiner. That is 1 word. So if you see a hyphenated word, that counts as 1. All other words count as 1. Okay, so I've created a nice little table for you, and you can just memorize this table if you get confused on test day and use it during your preparation so that it becomes natural and second nature to you and you don't even have to think about it on test day. So if the instruction says write 1 word, a correct answer would be, for example, airport, because it's telling you to write 1 word. But if you wrote the airport or airport, 2 different words, that would be wrong. So if the instruction was write 1 word and or a number, terminal 2 would be correct because that is 1 word and a number. Also, the number 2 would also be correct there because it is 1 word or a number. In terminal 2 would be wrong because that is more than 1 word and a number. And airport terminal 2, that would also be incorrect because that is 2 words and a number. So if the instruction was write no more than 2 words and or a number, terminal 2 would be correct, 2 would be correct, and Heathrow terminal 2 would also be correct because they are all no more than 2 words and or a number. Incorrect would be Heathrow Airport terminal 2 because that is more than 2 words. That is 3 words and a number. Write no more than 3 words. Outside Heathrow arrivals, that is 3 words, so that would be correct. Outside Heathrow arrivals tomorrow, that is incorrect because that is more than 3 words. Now that might sound confusing right now. Often students do find that confusing. The best way to do that is just through practice. All right. So when you're practicing and you see some instructions like that, be very careful and think about it, and you'll get used to it like anything else. Don't just look at that table and think, that's very confusing, I won't be able to use it. You will if you practice it. My next tip is to try and do the computer-based listening test. I have done both, and I've spoken to many students that have done both, and they find the computer-based test easier for many different reasons. Now, first of all, it is not going to dramatically improve your score. You're still doing the same test, but there are some practical considerations that do make it a little bit easier. So first of all, you have to write less. So because it is on a computer screen, for example, it might be multiple choice, you just have to click A, B, or C, or there will be a drop-down menu where you will be able to pick the correct option. That is a lot less time consuming, and you just have to think a lot less, and you're reducing the number of different things that you're doing at the same time, and that just makes it practically easier. A lot of students have also commented that in the paper-based test, they constantly have to be looking up and looking down and thinking about what they're doing, whereas it is far more natural for them to be listening, looking at a computer screen, and picking the correct answers. I don't know why, but I agree with these students. I think it is just a lot easier. You're doing fewer things on test day. Again, that's what I think, and that's what a lot of students who got a band 9 have said. We've already talked about this in the format part of this video, but because you have headphones, it is often a lot easier to hear what the person is saying. And it's a listening test at the end of the day. The better you're able to listen to what is being said, the higher your score is going to be. Also, a lot of students have just said that it's less stressful doing the computer-based test because there are fewer people in the room. When I did the test, I think there were about 7 or 8 people. Compare that with some of the huge test centers where, there's 50 to 100 people all doing the test at the same time in a big room. Some people find that extremely stressful, and anything that causes stress is normally going to lower your score. And there are other advantages to the computer-based test, which we will mention again later in this video. So the next one is, if you are doing the paper-based test, use a pencil, all right? Because often they will play tricks on you, they will have traps in there, and you will have to change your answer. So what I would recommend doing is use a pencil so that you can easily change your answer. Again, speed is very, very important. You're going to have to go on to the next question, and you don't want to be panicking and going, oh, how do I delete this? The fewer things that you think about on test day, the higher your score is going to be. Probably the most common question that we get asked is, can I write all in capitals? And my answer is very different from most of the teachers that I see online. So most of the teachers will give you a yes or a no answer. If you actually go and search on the internet, there are very different views on this, and it's very difficult to find the correct information on this. And what happens on test day is students overthink this. And again, the more you think, the lower your score is going to be. You want all of your brain power. Think of your brain as a computer, or think of your brain as a battery. Everything that you think about drains that battery. So if you're going into the test thinking, should I use capital letters or not capital letters, or should I put a capital at the beginning of them, it's draining your battery, and you're not going to spend the time actually just listening and getting the correct answer. So make one decision that will remove all other decisions. And that one decision is just write all in capitals. If you do that, you don't have to worry about it, and then you can focus on getting the score that you need. The next tip is about spelling. Spelling is very, very, very important. A huge number of students that I've worked with had great listening skills, great strategy. They were ready to get a band 9, but because they were spelling a few words incorrectly, they were getting a lower score. So here's a system that we give our students. Number one, when you are practicing, be very honest with yourselves when you're giving yourself a correct answer or an incorrect answer. If you spelt one letter wrong, that is completely wrong. What a lot of students do is they go very easy on themselves, and they think, oh, I spelled it incorrectly, but I'll give myself a tick, I'll give myself a correct answer, I'll spell it correctly on test day. You probably won't. So be very honest with yourself. Secondly, look at all of your spelling mistakes, all the questions that you got wrong because of spelling, and put those words into a document. Set up a Google Doc or whatever you want on your phone or your computer and call it spelling mistakes. You can do this with writing as well if you're consistently making writing spelling mistakes. Put those into your doc so you'll have a document with all the words that you spelt incorrectly. Then what you do is you show the correct spelling beside it. And then, once a week or once a month, you review those, you cover up the ones that are correct, and you try to spell those words correctly. Over time, you will notice common words that you will always spell incorrectly, and then you will remove those spelling mistakes and improve your ability to spell these words correctly. My next tip is probably the most important one, but the one that sounds really obvious and not very useful. Your job is to find the correct answer. How is that useful? Well, your job is not to understand every single word and understand everything that is going on in the listening test. Many students will do a listening practice test, and especially in part 3 and part 4, there will be words or phrases or maybe a whole sentence that you don't understand, and they will panic and they'll think, I don't understand this, and then they'll get all these questions wrong. Again, stress is your enemy. You do not want to be very stressed out, and you don't want to be second guessing yourself. You don't want to have very low confidence just because you don't understand certain words. Now, I'm a native English speaker. I am an IELTS teacher. From time to time, I will listen to IELTS listening tests, and there will be a few words in there that I don't understand. The English language is huge. There are professors of English at Cambridge University that will not know some words in the IELTS listening test. It is not your job to understand every single word. It is your job to get the correct answers. So if you hear a word you don't understand, you can do two things. Number one, ignore it. Is it essential that you understand that word? Is it essential for helping you answer the question? If it's not, forget about it. Or number two, you can guess the meaning of that word from the context, from the words around it, from the sentences around it, if it's crucial to help you answer the question. If you do that, it reduces stress and it improves your vocabulary, because you're going to constantly be improving your vocabulary by guessing the meaning of new words. Guess what? That is how you learn languages and how you improve vocabulary. You hear words you don't understand, you guess what they mean, you check it later, and you have learned a new word. So when you hear a new word, check back later, look at the script in the practice test, think about the meaning of that word, and then you're constantly improving your vocabulary. But if on test day you do not understand something, do not panic. The next tip that I have is, and I'm going to show you exactly what I mean by looking at a real question, is prepare for the answers coming. All right, if I did the test and I didn't prepare for the answers coming, and I'm going to show you what that means in a second, I would not get a band 9. What you want to do is look at the questions and read them before you hear the listening. And you will have time to do this, and as you practice with real practice tests, you will get used to this. But let's go through this question and think about what we could do here and how that is going to help us. So the first thing that we're going to do here is we're going to think about the type of question that it is. So this is a sentence completion question, and they want one word only. So this is preparing your answers. What type of question is coming up, and how many words or letters or numbers are going to have to be put in here. The next, read the title. The title is going to give you context. This is going to help prepare your brain for what is coming. Why do we have titles in books? Why do we have titles in audiobooks? Why do we have titles in anything? Because it makes it easier for our brains to digest something if we know what is coming. Then there are different subheadings here. So 19th century, manufacturing, transport, retailing. This is going to help us understand where in the listening we are. It is going to help or prevent us from getting lost. Then the next thing that we can do is we can think about the types of words that might come up. So for the first time, people's possessions were used to measure Britain's blank. So just by looking at the sentence structure here and thinking about the grammar, this is probably going to be a noun. Remember, it's only one word. And then the next one here, developments in production of goods and in, so it's going to be something similar to production of goods. Again, it's probably going to be a noun. And when they are talking about production of goods, we know that the answer is going to be in and around that area. You can also predict the answer that might come up. It's not always going to be exactly what you predict, but often the case it is. So for the first time, people's possessions were used to measure Britain's wealth, prosperity, GDP. So before you even listen to this, you're thinking of the types of answers that might come up, and that makes it much easier to find the correct answer. And I actually checked the back of the book, and it is wealth, and I haven't done this test before, so that shows you, I promise I'm not messing around. It was very, very easy to predict that. So how do you develop that as a skill? Well, like any skill, you practice it. You cannot just listen to that tip and then do that for the first time on test day. You need to get used to every time that you see a question, preparing for it. You know, what type of question is it? How many words or how many letters or how many numbers am I going to put in there? What's the title? What types of words might come up? Predict the word that probably will come up. Think about the staging. What will they be talking about when they're talking about that answer? And that is really going to help you. And then on test day, the Band 9 students that I work with, they don't even think about those things. They do them naturally. So the next tip is all about focus. So we already talked about listening to English for 30 minutes at a time, but let's talk about focus in a little bit more detail, because being able to listen to something and being 100% focused on what you are listening to are two different things. I'm sure that you have been listening to your mother or your wife or your sister or your brother or your husband or whoever it is, and they're talking and you kind of lose focus on what they're saying. You're like, sorry, what? They might get annoyed with you a little bit for not paying attention to them. But as human beings, our brains do not 100% focus on what we're reading or what we are listening to. You need to develop that as a skill. But the good news is you can develop it. Number one, we've already talked about that. Think about listening and focus as a muscle. So again, get yourself a timer. Focus on listening for 5 minutes, then the next day 10, then 15, then 20, and build it up as a muscle. The second thing is meditation. Meditation is not only going to help you with focus, but it's going to help you with your mental health. It's going to help you with your general happiness, and it gives you a little bit of a break when you're studying. So often students email us and tell us that, you know, their test is next week or their test is in a few days. If that's the case, you're probably going to be studying and practicing a lot. A good way to break up your practice sessions and your studying sessions is to meditate. There are many, many apps. Don't ask me which one. There are, a huge number of apps that you can use, or if you know how to meditate already, do it for 5 or 10 minutes in between blocks of studying. It is going to improve your cognitive ability, your everything. It is a very, very good practice to learn, but it definitely helps focus. Another great way to improve your focus is by reducing stress on test day. The number one reason students get stressed is they don't prepare enough. They know that they're going to fail or they might fail. The students that we work with on our VIP course that get a band 8, 8.59, they normally go into the test and it's just a normal day for them. They don't feel that much stress. Why? Because they are 100% prepared. They have done so much practice and learned all of these strategies and practiced all of this to the point where they know, because they have got a band 8 or a band 9 10 times during real practice tests, they know all they have to do is just put what they have learned into practice. Now, I'm not saying you have to join our VIP course, but do not do the test until you are 100% ready. You will know you're 100% ready by doing real practice tests under exam conditions. If you are consistently getting the score that you need, you're not going to be that stressed. But if you need a band 8 and you're constantly getting 6.5 or 7, stop lying to yourself. You're not magically going to jump up in score on test day. It is better to delay your test or cancel your test, do it later in the year, wait a couple of months, and do it when you are totally prepared. That is going to mean that you are not thinking about, I'm going to fail. You're just totally focused on getting the score that you need. I've also worked with a lot of students who couldn't focus, and what we did was reduce the number of distractions in their lives. The big distractions that we find are, number one, social media. We literally got them to delete all social media from their phones, and we got them to install browsers that couldn't access social media. Sounds extreme, but these apps are designed to steal your focus. Another one is news and TV shows and things like that, especially the news. We have got students to just stop watching the news because you don't want in the back of your brain thinking about, who has bombed who, or, what the stock market is doing, or what weather disaster happened this year. Just eliminate all of that from your life. And, when you combine those two, watching social media all day and just getting news pumped into your brain all day, it's impossible to focus. Another big distraction is people that are draining, people in your lives that create more problems than they solve, people in your life that make their problems your problems. You don't want those people in your life, especially when you're doing an IELTS test. Because, if your friend or your loved one is having a huge issue in their life and you have to fix it for them, you're not going to be able to prepare for the test and you're not going to be able to focus on test day. Probably a good idea to cut those people out for life, but if you can't do that, sit down and explain to them that you have a big test, you need to focus for a few weeks or a few months, and, as a bonus, they might leave you alone entirely. But social media, news, and people with a lot of problems reduce your focus. So the next tip is focus on the question that you're doing, but think about the next one coming up. So what does that mean? So practically speaking, for example, this question. The first part of this question is about the 19th century. When they are talking about the 19th century, you want to be totally focused in on that part to get the correct answer. But you want to have part of your brain thinking about main areas of change, manufacturing, the Industrial Revolution. Because when they start talking about that, that is your signal, that is the flag to move on to that part and be totally focused on that part. Now you might think that that's very difficult, and it is, but let's think about other areas of life where you do that. When you're driving a car, you are totally focused on the road in front of you and maybe the car in front of you. But you're also at your periphery thinking about what is coming in this way, what is coming in that way. Is that kid going to, ride their bike right in front of me? What's happening behind me? Is someone going to ram in behind me if I brake? So you're 100% focused on the road in front of you, but you also have one part of your brain thinking of other stuff. You do this all the time in normal life. You need to practice this before test day by looking at real questions and practicing this technique. It will feel strange and it will feel difficult when you're doing it, but like anything else, the more you practice it, the easier it becomes. And this is why practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. When you're practicing, you're not just doing tests. That's what most students do. They just do tests, and they're like, why is my score not improving? When you are doing tests, you are trying to improve these things. You're trying to improve these techniques, such as preparing for the questions coming up, focusing on the question that you're doing, whilst thinking peripherally about the question that is coming up. The next tip is you can get a question wrong and still get a band 9. All right, so you can get a band 9 and get one question wrong. Why is this important? As I've said many times, human brains are not perfect. We're not robots. The robots have not replaced us yet. So you will lose focus from time to time. When I did the test, I got the first question wrong, I think. So the test was about to start and I was looking out the window thinking about where I was going to go for a drink after the test. Like, I was not focused on what I was doing. And then the test began and it was a license plate number. And I was like, oh, they're only going to say this once and I've completely missed it. There are two things that you can do in that situation. 80% of students, if they missed the first question, would panic and think, I'm going to mess up my entire test. Oh, let's just leave now. Let's just go to the bar and get drunk now. This is such a stupid thing. I'm stupid. I'm going to fail. All my friends and family are going to think that I'm dumb. If you do that, you're pretty much guaranteeing that you will fail to get the score that you need. What you should do instead is what I did, is just think, that's fine. I've got one of them wrong, but I need to focus for the rest of them and get all of the rest of them correct. So if you get a question that you either lose focus on, or especially in part 4, you might get a question that is just really, really difficult, don't beat yourself up and don't obsess about this question. Guess it, put it down, and then move on to the next question. The next tip for the listening test is keep moving or you're dead. So I read a lot of books about history, especially military history, and the best people in the world at going into a room and killing lots of bad guys are the SAS, the British Special Forces. They're amazing at going into rooms and just killing everybody in there, apart from the hostages. And what they call the door is the murder hole. And their technique is to move into the room, get out of that murder hole, and just keep moving until they are safe. That is the exact same technique that you need to use during the listening test. If you freeze in the murder hole and you stop moving, you stop thinking about what you're doing, you're dead. But if you keep moving and you keep going and you keep thinking, then you're going to do very, very well and you'll be safe. The next tip for the IELTS listening test is always give an answer, even if you don't know. So a lot of the questions are going to be multiple choice or choose a different option. Even if you don't know, you should guess, because if there's 3 options, you have a 33 and a third chance of getting the right score. Now, if we want a band 9, we do not want to be guessing most of the questions. We want to be answering them correctly. But even students that I've worked with that have got a band 9 have made a couple of guesses and still got a band 9. So there is a strategy that you can use that is going to help you give educated guesses. All right, these are strategic guesses. They are guesses that have a higher chance of getting the correct score than just a third. So the first way that you can do this is through elimination. All right, so let's say, for example, you're doing this question and you get stuck on question 23. In connection with modern refrigerators, both Annie and Jack are worried about A, the complexity of the technology, B, the fact that some are disposed of irresponsibly, or C, the large number that quickly break down. So let's say they're talking about the technology being very complicated, and because of this, many of them break down. But they're not talking about how they are disposed of, and they're not talking about that at all. What you can do is you can eliminate B, and then make a guess, is it going to be A or C? Now again, you're only doing this with questions that are very, very difficult, or you lose focus, or you get lost. But you've just increased your chances from 33% to 50%. The next thing you can do is prediction. So if we look at this example again, for the first time people's possessions were used to measure Britain's wealth, you can guess from the context what the correct answer is. So even if you lost focus, let's say you just started daydreaming about something while they were talking about that, I would write in wealth. It might be right, it might be wrong, but if you write nothing, you are guaranteed 100% that it's wrong. If you write in something, at least you have a chance. The next tip is to use the example recording to get used to the voices, get used to the accents, and get used to the question that they are giving you. So in some parts of the listening test, they will play an example recording, and they normally will be the same people talking with the same accent, answering the same type of question. So for example, it might be writing down a telephone number. So listen to that, and what it will do is not only will it help you understand how to answer the question, it will help you tune in to what the person sounds like, especially their accent. because sometimes the accent can be quite unusual for you. You probably are not going to be able to listen to every single English-speaking accent in the world. There are way too many of them. But if they do play this example, always carefully listen to it, because you will tune into the accent, especially if it is an unusual accent. The final tip is not to worry too much about accents. As I said before, the listening test is not like listening to real native English speakers talk to each other. If you went into my local coffee shop or my local bar, you wouldn't understand 90% of what is being said. But when I'm speaking to you, I'm an English teacher, I'm speaking with a neutral accent very clearly and very slowly. That is probably what you're going to hear on the listening test. It is much better to spend your time practicing and preparing the different strategies that we're going to talk about in the rest of this lesson than it is to try and perfect the listening of, the hundreds, if not thousands, of different English-speaking accents. In Ireland and the UK alone, there are hundreds of different types of accents. You're not going to get that. You don't need to worry about that on the listening test. Familiarize yourself with it. You can listen to different podcasts, different news shows, listen to the local news in America, Canada, the UK, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, wherever you want to do. But don't worry too much about it. People are not going to speak in their very, very unusual accent in the listening test. Now let's talk about common traps or tricks or distractors that you might find in the IELTS listening test. And there are a series of these that might trick you into giving the wrong answer. Before we go through all of these, I want to talk first about mindset, which is very, very important. A lot of students get frustrated with the listening test especially because they think that IELTS and the people at Cambridge are trying to trick them into getting a lower score than they deserve. If you believe that, you're going to just give up and you're going to find your preparation really, really frustrating. We don't want that. Let's look at what actually is happening. What they are doing is they're trying to recreate real life. That is what the whole IELTS test is doing. It is recreating what will happen when you move to an English-speaking country. So, for example, let's say you're working as a doctor or a nurse and they ask you for a particular drug or something like that. So you're in the operating theatre and they say, give me 25 cc's of adrenaline. I'm obviously not a doctor, that's just an idea I had. And then they say, no, actually we need 50 cc's. So what they've done is they've changed the answer there. If you gave 25, it would be wrong. But by giving 50 and thinking about the trick that they just played on you, you will be fine. So don't see it as a trick, see it as a challenge. All of these things that I'm going to talk about now are challenges that they set for you. So even if I say trap or trick, try and think of challenge. It's going to make it much, much easier for you to learn this. So the first trap that they might set for you, or challenge that they might set for you, is changing the correct answer from one answer to the next answer. Normally what this will mean is they will give an answer that could be correct, and then later on in the recording they will change it to something different. Let's look at how they could do that with a real question. So if we have a look at this question, it says name of station returning to. They could say something like, we started off in London and then we arrived in Manchester. So you are listening out for a place, a town, a city, a station, and you hear London, and then they say, well, we started off in London and then we arrived later in Manchester. Because you are hyper-focused on trying to find a place or a city, you just hear London, write down the first thing that you say. You need to be aware of this and aware that they might change it. So don't just be hyper-focused on predicting and finding the correct answer. Kind of allow yourself to listen to the words and the sentences around what they are saying and make a decision based on that. Another common trap or challenge could be that they use synonyms or paraphrasing. So what happens is you are looking at the question, you see a word or a phrase in the question, and you are listening out for that exact phrase. Sometimes it will be that exact phrase or that exact word, but sometimes it will be a paraphrase or a synonym. Now, synonyms are just the words that mean the same thing but are different. For example, man, male, woman, female mean exactly the same thing, even in 2023, and they are synonyms of each other. So let's look at this example again. Name of station returning to. So instead of station, they might use destination. Or instead of returning, they could say return. Instead of returning to, they might use the phrase come back. When will you come back? So if you're just listening out for station returning to, and they say something like coming back to your final destination, you're going to get completely lost. So you need to keep an open mind. When you are looking at the questions, don't just think, what am I looking for exactly in the question? Think, what could it be? What synonym could they use? What different phrasing could they use that means the same thing, but is a different word? Another challenge is plurals, especially plural nouns. So, for example, let's say you are listening to people offering each other a cup of tea. All right, so they're having a cup of tea, and a very common question in that scenario is, do you take sugar? So in this scenario, sugar is an uncountable noun. But then the person might say, yes, I'll have 2 sugars, or I take 2 sugars. So you have 2 different words here, sugar and sugars. The only difference is a little S on the end, but one will be correct and one will be wrong. And there's 2 ways that you can overcome this problem. One is by listening to what you hear. If there is an S on the end or a Z on the end, then it is probably the plural form you're talking about. But also you can think grammatically. I take 2 sugar, grammatically is incorrect. I take 2 sugars, grammatically is correct. So you need to be aware of the pronunciation, your listening skills, and grammar and spelling all at the same time. Another challenge is unusual spellings of names or places normally. So this happens a lot with popular surnames, so last names in English. So for example, we have very popular names like Smith, Jones, Brown, but there are standard spellings of those names and then unusual spellings of those names. So for example, Brown, the standard spelling is B-R-O-W-N, but an unusual spelling, but quite common, is B-R-O-W-N-E. Now you shouldn't worry too much about this, because if there is an unusual spelling, normally comes in part 1 where someone is on a call with someone, they're on a phone call, and they're asking them for their name. If it is an unusual spelling of their name, or maybe a city or a town or something like that, then they will spell it out. They'll say, my name is Brown. And how do you spell that? B-R-O-W-N-E. So the trap that a lot of students fall into is they hear Brown. Oh, I know how to spell Brown. They'll write it down immediately as the standard spelling, and then they will miss the person spelling it out. So especially in part 1, if the people that you're listening to ask for a spelling or spell anything out, then you should listen exactly to how they spell it and then put it in there. A challenge that many people have when I am talking to them is my similar sounding surname. And this is a big trap that a lot of students fall into. There are words that sound very similar to each other. So my surname is Pell, P-E-L-L. And every time I meet someone new, they're like, Bell, Tell, Del, Hell, because they all sound kind of similar. Again, you don't need to worry about this too much, because this normally comes in part 1, and if the person has an unusual surname, like me, what I will do when I'm on the phone with someone is I will spell it out to them. I'll say P for Papa, E for Echo, L for Lima, L for Lima. Again, how you overcome this is by listening not to the first thing, the first word that you hear, Mr. Pell, and you write Bell. Listen out if they spell it and write the exact spelling. The final trap that a lot of students fall into is not being aware of not listening out for negatives and double negatives. So what are those? Well, a negative is when you use a word like not or didn't or wasn't. You also need to be aware of double negatives in English. This can be very, very unusual if your native language doesn't have this. So, for example, not bad in English means good. Not, negative, bad, negative, not bad means good. Now, I have heard some double negatives from time to time on practice tests, but most of the time it is just like not or wasn't or didn't. So what does that mean? Let's have a look at a particular question. So here we have a customer satisfaction survey. Satisfaction with journey, least satisfied with. So imagine someone is on a call with another person. They're asking about their journey. What were you least satisfied with? If they said food wasn't bad, or they said, what did you think of the food? And they said, not bad. Some people might hear that and think that the food was what they were least satisfied with. But they're actually saying the opposite. They're saying the food was quite good. Often what will happen is they will use a negative and then they will say the correct answer after that. So for example, they might say something like, well, the food wasn't bad, but the drinks were terrible. So in that sentence, the food wasn't bad, but the drinks were terrible. What they were least satisfied with is the drinks. The main thing to remember is not all questions will have these challenges, but you do need to be aware of them. Let's use a driving analogy again. When you're driving a car, you are not hyper focused on what is happening right at the front of the car. You are kind of focused on that. It does have most of your attention, but you're also paying attention to the periphery. You're paying attention to what's happening behind you, to your right and to your left. That should be the same thing that you're doing acoustically, audibly, when you are listening to the transcripts. So most of your attention should be on what's the correct answer, but pay attention to what is going on around what you think might be the correct answer, because it might change, they might spell it out differently, there could be a synonym, or it could be a negative, and that's not actually the correct answer. The correct answer is coming up. You're probably very confused now and very frustrated, but with practice, this becomes much easier. Let's show you where you can find real practice tests. Okay, so in this part is extremely important. More students fail the IELTS test by using fake, unreliable tests than anything to do with their listening ability or their English ability. About 90% of the tests that you'll find online and on YouTube are actually fake. Don't worry, we're going to show you how to spot the fake ones so you'll know 100% of the time whether they're real or not. And we're going to show you exactly where you can find real free practice tests. I've also put together links for all of the places on the internet where you can find these real free practice tests that are reliable. I've put them all into one document and I put them in the description below for you, just to make it really handy for you. But before I give you that and before I show you the 4 places where you can find these reliable ones, I want to talk about why fake tests are so dangerous. Because when I just show people where to find the reliable ones, most of the time they will use those too quickly and then they'll go and use the fake ones. The fake ones are produced by people who don't know what they're doing. All right, I'm not criticizing anyone or saying I'm better than anyone, but there is a huge difference between a teacher that is trying to help people improve their scores and a YouTuber who is trying to increase the number of views on their channel, or a blogger who is trying to increase the number of views on their website. More than 90% of the tests that you'll find online are fake. These people don't care if you improve